What's up, Cougar Nation, and welcome up again aboard the Hype Train podcast. I am your host, Joe Wheat. That's at Joe Wheat27 on Twitter. As always, with my boys who are fans of a team with a better quarterback than DJ Uiagalelei, Hunter Miller, and Trevor Levitt. Brethren, how we doing?
That narrowed it down to no one. That phrasing wasn't right. That didn't narrow it down at all, except for the fact that this isn't a Florida State podcast.
So. That was such a brutal game last night.
I'm not going to say anything about it, but if I were to say something about it, I would say, how can you start a Hype Train podcast immediately after a BYU victory by talking about Florida State?
Because it's
not fans of teams that are 1-0. Not
hear me out.
Quarterback that.
Hear me out. It sets the stage for how far along BYU has come. Because the entire time I watched that football game, all I could think was, okay, we got a quarterback whose receivers are dropping all these passes, an offensive line that can't block, a running game that can't get going, and it's the quarterback's fault. And I just thought to myself, I know what this feels like. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't know what it felt like on Saturday.
It was a glorious feeling. I think to tie this in just a little bit, like the DJU talk too, we did bring up during the Georgia Tech game a question, which was at the time, would you take DJU over our current QB situation? And all of us were like, no, we'd still take DJU. Post game on Saturday, we were all like, no, we're set. This is great.
Threw the entire podcast under the bus. The entire podcast. He was like, yeah, everyone is a big dumb idiot, and said that they would rather have DJ Uiagalelei than the current BYU quarterback room. Did I say it? Yes. Do I know ball? No. But that's why we do this podcast, and that's why we watch the games. We love and we learn, and we become better fans and better podcast hosts. DJ Uiagalelei has not been doing any loving and certainly no learning on how to become a better quarterback. You know who did do a lot of learning this offseason was Jake Retzlaff, but we'll get to that later.
There were two alternating openers I was thinking about going with. I picked the wrong one with DJU. The second opener I was going to go with, if we just want to spin that right back, is when was the last time you guys called in sick for something less than a heart attack?
Yeah,
because for me it might be tomorrow.
Was good.
Because for me it might be tomorrow because I got a sore throat thing going on. It's cold, everything like that. So forgive me if my voice goes out at a certain point. But Jay Hill showed up to work 2 days after his chest was open on an operating table.
I don't think that's how stents work, but yeah,
that's how I choose to believe it works.
Yes, that is the that true story.
That's not a lie if you
not
believe
doctors. It. Yes, true canon in our heads is that he had open heart surgery and then was at a football game the next morning. I was going to open the podcast by saying, again, apparently our heads were just with Florida State because that's the most recent football game we all watched. My lead-in was going to be, what would be the craziest thing you would claim to do should BYU lose to an opponent? Because currently viral right now is a Florida State fan that said he would eat some dog poop out of a red Solo cup with a spoon should Florida State lose to Boston College. And that fan has since deleted, I think, all social medias.
He might have to change his phone number because apparently his phone number has been found by certain members of the media.
Yeah. Well, there was a guy on social media that found his, I think, fiance, but then ultimately decided that he wasn't going to quote unquote involve civilians in this. And so I do know, I don't know if you guys ever saw the tweet, but he's back. He's back on Twitter. Same guy that said he wasn't going to approach the fiance, convinced him to come back.
Is he?
But I didn't see that. Yeah, but he said he wasn't going to do it, which is a total shame.
Coward. Coward. What would you do to hopefully guarantee BYU beats SMU this weekend?
I don't know. I mean, I would like to say I would do that, but I don't think I could. Just like the visual has like kept me from eating most of the day because my timeline has been nothing but red Solo cups and dog poop.
That's a heck of a timeline.
That
is how Elon Musk pictured X going.
However, a red Solo cup and dog poop can also be the phrases used to describe this upcoming presidential election. So, really, it's been that way for months.
For that kind of podcast. We've gone off the rails. It's been 5 minutes, but I guess that's what happens when BYU comes out victorious.
Yeah, it's giddiness.
Okay, look, I feel really bad so last week we were accused of not being hype enough, particularly by one fan who basically said he quit listening at the 52-minute mark, which was kind of ironic because at the 55-minute mark, we pretty much said everything that he was going to say and then refuted everything that he was going to say. But unfortunately, he stopped listening about 3 minutes too early. Regardless, he's going to be sad he's missing this one because there's a lot of good to talk about the BYU win. Where do you guys want to start?
I guess let's start with this. What was everyone's feeling? What was it like for each of you just kind of being back at LaVell Edwards Stadium this Saturday? Right? Like that.
I could have cried, honestly.
I saw Joe crossing the street. I hit him with the Go Cougs. Because there was like 2 seconds left on to cross, and he was going towards the stadium. I was going towards the ESPN broadcast, and I said "Go Cougs," and without like looking up or anything, he said "Go Cougs," and then looked up. And I mean, did you notice it was me at first, or did you kind of did a double take?
Reflexively, I did the "Go Cougs," and then I realized who I was talking to. I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's Hunter."
So Joe was in the headspace.
How it should be, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're at Disneyland or anywhere and you hear "Go Cougs," just throw it back.
I went on a hike Saturday morning and there were 3 people on the trail with us that were wearing BYU gear of some sort. I said "Go Cougs," and not a single one gave me a "Go Cougs" back. It's just.
What are we doing?
I did get one at the airport. Shout out to whoever that was. He was wearing a hat. I said "Go Cougs." We were crossing each other on the escalator, and he said "Go Cougs" back.
All right.
And I was like, okay, there's hope in humanity.
We're in business. It was great. Again, 90 degrees outside. I was afraid I was going to come out of that game looking like Two-Face because the sun was only reflecting off one side of my face. But it was worth it. Vibes were great pre-game. The Rock was amazing. Can I just say, like, shout out to BYU fans. We have universally considered this one of like the lowest hype off seasons in recent memory, maybe in my lifetime that I can remember. And yet still game 1 against an FCS opponent. It's a sold out crowd with over 13,000 students in the building an hour before kickoff. Vibes were great. Even in a time where hype is at an all-time low, and fans were rewarded, honestly, because it was nice to watch a BYU football team come out and on their first 2 drives score touchdowns. First 2 drives on defense, force a 3 and out. We're like 10 minutes into the game and it's already 14-0. Like that, I don't know. Like it was just like, it was the perfect game to bring your family to. It really felt that way. Like the perfect game to like get your kids involved with BYU football. Perfect way to kick off a season, if we're being perfectly honest.
Yeah, that to your point, Joe, that game was rated E for everyone. But it was one of those things where, to me, like, not only were we scoring, but it just felt like, well, first of all, just to rewind even, shout out to just the vibe that BYU has created at LaVell Edwards Stadium, because every time I walk in there, like, you go in, and for me, there's kind of the baggage in the back of your head, right? Like, what is the quarterback situation going to look like? Is the defensive line going to be improved? as the offensive line improved. And you scan your ticket, it does that little ding, and I just like walk in and like just everything feels okay. You know what I mean? And, like people are buying cougar tails, like
it's true.
The mint brownies, like it's just like one of those things. They've got the cut playing while the punters and kickers warm up, and it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like last Thanksgiving was a little tumultuous, but I'm home, right? And then the family's back together. And so that was wonderful. But for me, not only were we scoring, Joe, but it just felt like we were scoring in ways that were very much like BYU football. Like air the ball out, get it out to talented receivers. You've got running backs making plays. The quarterback looks like not even just competent, but like elite at times. And it just felt like we found our identity again, whereas like last year is more of a ginormous like 12-game identity crisis for the most part. And so to just be able to witness all that in game one, regardless of opponent, it was a breath of fresh air.
Well, and to your point, like BYU scored in kind of in every which way, because first drive was 13 plays for 65 yards. And you're thinking, okay, like maybe we're just going to be that kind of team this year. Second drive, 4 plays, 86 yards, bam, touchdown. It's just, it just showed that like BYU was prepared, and they met the moment. But weirdly enough, like it was probably the first time I walked into a BYU football game and like felt kind of stress-free, because it was just like whatever happens is going to happen. Shout out to my wife, Michaela, on the way. She's a big BYU fan. On the way to the stadium, we're listening to Hans and Greg. We're talking about like, okay, what's the quarterback situation going to be? And she's saying all the things that we have been debating all off season. Like, why did we bring in a quarterback who hasn't played in 2 years out of the transfer portal? Well, if Gary is such a good runner, why are we starting Jake? I thought Jake was really bad last year. Like, why is he a starting quarterback? And I'm telling her like, babe, like this is exactly what we've been talking about all off season for the last 8 months. And she goes, well, it's so much more efficient to just say it like 5 minutes before the game starts. And I have never felt more attacked in my entire life. We have built a podcast brand off of discussing these things for the last 12 months, and she has the nerve to just have that conversation 5 minutes before the game. And all of that was ruled like completely irrelevant once the game actually started and Jake started slinging it around the field. And I just wasted the last 9 months of my life when it could have been an email right before the game.
That's exactly, dang it, you stole it. Yeah, Michaela really did hit you with this could have been an email, but she's fantastic. She's awesome.
But where's the fun in that? What was your experience, Hunter?
I mean, my experience, it's just like a sense of like feeling like at home, right? Like, I don't know if it's just like the nostalgia factor, the tradition factor, like what it is. But like for me, I moved to Utah when I was about 12 years old. And like from that moment until the day I left on my mission, I went to, I think, every BYU home game except for maybe like 1 or 2. Always the same, sit in the same seats. My grandpa's a professor at BYU, has had the same season tickets, I think, since my dad's family moved to Utah in the 90s. And just like, it's just that sense of tradition, right? Like I get there, I always park kind of just off Stadium Avenue between the stadium and the temple. I walk down, I sit in the same seats on the east bleachers, section 133. And just, my grandpa's there, my uncles are there. And it's just like the sense of like being at home, at ease, sense of, I think, just like, this is like my happy place in essence. Right. And, despite all the things that like change around, and this is going to be way more like sappy and probably serious than I think the initial question was intended. But just like as much as things change, right? Like I know people like their season tickets got changed. The abomination that is those half tables with the 4 seats around them are literally right in front of me. And that caused people to be, move in the stadium and move seats. I've obviously since the day that I've started going to BYU football games in 2006, 2007, growing up, went to college, went on a mission, got married, baby on the way, like all these things change. And yet like every fall, every late September, late August, early September, like you're back at Lavelle Edwards Stadium watching BYU football. So it's just for me like a special feeling, and just like I said, kind of the nostalgia of it all comes rushing back. Like, doesn't matter who's on the field, doesn't matter what color helmet they're wearing. It's just like BYU football. BYU football's back, and like it's the greatest feeling in the world.
So one of my buddies when we were in college, not a big football fan, but our friend group, like that's what we did, is we camp out for days for these football games. And whether you liked football or not, it's just kind of what you did. And I remember we were sitting on the front row of the Mississippi State game in 2016. We're about 45 minutes from kickoff. He's not there. And I text him and I'm like, "Are you coming?" And he texts our group and he goes, "Going to a BYU football game is a lot like going to church. Sometimes before it starts, you just think, man, I really don't want to go today. And then after it's over, you think, man, I'm really glad I went today." I think that was like the perfect way to, except when you're me and you're kind of a sicko for this stuff and you want to go for both things. But it does kind of feel like almost sacred in a way to me, because again, like BYU football represents so much of who I am as a person, from my religion to my university, to my family and all those ties. Just, a lot of fantastic memories wrapped up in it. And so when, on Tuesday last week, when I didn't have tickets yet, and I realized that there was a football game on Saturday, I couldn't help but think like, man, what am I doing? Like, what do you mean I'm going to watch the first game of the season from home? Like, that can't happen.
Me and Joe were at the Corner Canyon IMG game and like walking back to the cars, just talking about the BYU game. I was like, "Hey, like, see you next Saturday." Just like talking about being at the BYU game. And he was like, "Oh yeah, like, what are your plans for the game? Are you going?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Aren't you?" And he's like, or I think you were just like, "Okay, well, like, we're going to have a watch party like at our house. So like you can come by if you don't end up going." And it was like this moment of like, what do you mean? Like, you're not going to the BYU football game? Like, you're going to watch it at home? But yeah, I mean, I'm glad you were able to find some tickets and make your way to the stadium. But
yeah, no, and again, really glad I did. Like that was a really fun football game. If for no other reason for like the first time in about 2 years, BYU looked like a complete competent football team. And there's a lot to celebrate there. Like I get it was SIU, I get it's an FCS opponent. There's a lot of football teams that played FCS opponents over the weekend. We'll get to some of them later in the show as we kind of take our lap around the Big 12. But like a lot of teams struggle with FCS opponents, and BYU didn't. They dominated in basically every facet of the game. Like again, we'll probably make the comparison at some point between like the two FCS games last year against SUU and this year against SIU. Pretty much the same exact score, eerily similar. This one felt completely different. You left the stadium after that SUU game. BYU outgained SUU by about 47 yards. And we were kind of talking ourselves into, well, like, yeah, the running game sucked, but it was because their safeties, were on the wrong side of the line of scrimmage, like ready to receive the run. And so we just passed it over their heads. BYU threw through the exact same number of yards in this game, but still rushed for twice as many yards per attempt. So it's, again, just a completely different feel, even though the score was exactly the same.
Yeah, and it's just like the way they did it, right? Like at no point, I get like halftime score was what, 17-6. You're essentially 2 plays away of that the refs screwed up. That was like, I think it was a 11-point swing. Because they settled for a field goal after like that fumble that they reversed, that then they punted. Right?
They scored. They went down and they scored a touchdown on that possession.
So 6-point swing. You're essentially 1 play away from going into the half 17-0. But even like as close as like the scoreboard showed at halftime, it never felt that close. Like it never felt that SIU was in the game. Whereas with like Sam Houston, it took a Jacob Robinson interception in the end zone to like keep that game as far apart as it was in the scoreboard. Like that game felt just much closer. There's never any point in that same Houston game where you're like, oh, BYU's like got this in the bag, they're going to run away with it. Whereas I felt that way probably for 50 minutes of this game on Saturday.
I mean, excuse me, 100%. Like, to your point about like, I remember looking up at the scoreboard at halftime, and BYU I think had 275 yards of offense at the half, and I'm just thinking, how do we only have 17 points? And like again, like that, but that feels good. Like 275 yards. Like BYU ended up outgaining SIU by about 296 yards in this game. That's more yard. Like that margin is more yards than BYU gained in 7 of their 12 games last season. Like that is an insane number. So like in terms of like, you know, it's just one game. It's just it's an FCS opponent. I'm still going to celebrate the heck out of that game because again, for the first time in 644 days, BYU broke the 400-yard mark on offense, and then blew past that number with about like 7 minutes left to go in the third quarter. It was, again, there's a ton of stats we can kind of walk through to show like how good this game was relative to where BYU was a year ago. But it was just really refreshing to watch BYU pretty much do whatever they want against an opponent. Like credit to A-Rod, credit to Kalani Sitake, who was calling the game on defense. BYU did whatever they wanted to do in that game, scored however they wanted, defended however they wanted, and it pretty much all worked.
Well, our main man, BYU stats man, tweeted out that BYU didn't like reach the same rushing total that they had against SIU last season until I think it was the third game against Arkansas. Like BYU had more rushing yards this week than they had in the first 2 weeks last season combined.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective, which is absolutely crazy.
And if we just want to keep it to FCS, on Saturday, BYU averaged 2.1 yards before contact on rushing. I'm pretty sure against SUU, they averaged 2 yards per carry total. So BYU outgained themselves last year against SUU before the running backs ever got touched. So again, just like total improvement on all aspects of the game. I guess we can start with the offense. If we want to go position by position, what kind of stood out to you on the offense as things that really have you excited for the season?
I think one of the things I wanted to hit on first with the offense, just because he's taken a little bit of flack over the offseason, but I felt like just the offense as a whole ran a lot better because A-Rod was a lot more aggressive with some of his play calls. I mean, obviously we went forward on fourth down twice in the first series and ended up going for it, I think, another 2 or 3 times after that. But it was very clear that we didn't necessarily do anything crazy. I mean, there was obviously that play with Kingston throwing to the tight end that resulted in a defensive pass interference. But this felt like a game that A-Rod was calling because he knew that we were just better and that he wasn't trying to hide anything. And I think that was something that we even had discussed and had worried about previously, was that he was just going to come out vanilla. He was just going to try and hide everything. And instead he just called football. Like we kind of just went over this like 5 minutes ago, but he just called BYU football as it's meant to be called. Just air it out, make the other team make plays. They couldn't. And that to me was something that I felt like helped set the tone. No one was having to bring more energy or make more out of like really dull offensive play calling. They just were themselves. A-Rod was himself, and the offense was able to just kind of move efficiently through that.
It did seem like at the start they were kind of trying to not give up too much of the playbook. I think they ran like that quick pitch to the right out of shotgun like 5 times in like the first half. But But you're right. There was no like head scratching play calls. Like if we want to just go through the offense, let's start at the top, which is Aaron Roderick. There was no like, why would you, like, why are you running that? Like, why would you run, get down the field and then immediately try to pass? Like anything like that, right? That we've seen in the past. There was no, let's throw it out into the flat to Mason Wake on a 4th down, as opposed to going to Puka or one of your other guys. It was just like your tried and true, like our Chase Roberts is better than your players. So it's 4th and 5. We're going to run a slant route to Chase Roberts, right? Like it was just simple, straightforward football, which was great to see. Obviously, I think that changes as you get into the schedule more and you start facing tougher opponents. But it was refreshing, I think, to go into that game and just be like, our guys better than your guys. We're just going to, stick to our game plan and run what we know works because it's going to work.
Yeah. We already kind of talked about it. First drive was 13 plays, 65 yards for a touchdown, 2 4th downs on that drive. Mm-hmm. It felt very clear to me that like that drive was probably the most nervous I felt the entire game, because it felt like, oh my gosh, A-Rod doesn't trust Jake yet. Like pretty much what we had heard all of fall camp is, I don't know if we should say this, but in some ways it was described as the Battle of Mid.
Which is not us. That was a direct quote from someone else.
And so, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we need to go into this game running the football, and Jake just has to not lose it for us. Like if Jake throws for 200 yards today, it is going to be a massive success. And the way that first drive was called, it felt like it was kind of that same attitude where it's like, okay, we're just going to run the ball for 4 yards per carry. I think Jake threw maybe two or three passes of those 13. We need to look at the drive chart for that. But it like once it became clear that, Jake hit his first 3 throws, which were, 4th down conversions to Chase Roberts, 3rd and 4th down conversions, I think A-Rod kind of was like, oh, he's got this. Like those are really high leverage, high pressure situations. First drive of the season, 3rd down. Like it's really important that you go and score a touchdown on the first drive of the season after what we saw from the offense last year. A-Rod put it in Jake's hands. Jake put it into Chase Roberts' hands twice on the money. And after that, I think it became clear like, oh, he's got this. And then the next drive, it's just boom, on 3rd and 5, 20 yards, just on a laser right over the middle linebacker to Chase Roberts for a first down. And then next play right after that, it's a 63-yard bomb in the air to JoJo Phillips. And at that second, Hunter texts the entire group and goes, damn it, we're back.
We are. And we were in that moment.
But that's how it felt, man. It's like it was like the perfect buildup to that culmination of that throw where it's like, okay, Jake, like make the layups. And he made 3 layups in a row. And you're like, okay, like we got something. Jake looks better on that. And then all of a sudden he just uncorks one. And it's like, man, do we have like a legitimate game-changing quarterback again? Like that, because that's how it felt. There's one quarterback in the state of Utah, let alone the BYU roster, that can make that 63-yard throw in the air. And Jake did it twice in one game. Like that arm talent is insane. That's the reason he won the quarterback battle, is because he can make those throws. And quite frankly, Gary Bohannon can't.
Yeah. I mean, what we saw yesterday from Jake was, I think, everything we had hoped to see from Jake. There, you can get nitpicky, and there were a couple of missed throws, missing Erickson in the end zone. Yeah. Like you overthrow that. I think an overthrow to Cody down the left sideline, like maybe 50-50 blame. I would even say maybe even 60-40, more so like on Cody. Like Cody just looked a little slow. I think if that's Darius Lester or Keelan Marion or, Chase Roberts, I think they're in position to make that catch where the ball was thrown. There's the one that was behind Keelan a little bit. I think that was like on a 3rd down. But like aside from those 3, I can't really think of any throws that were like bad throws by Jake. which is exactly what we said all off season, right? Was like Jake's decision making. And it seems to be that his decision making, for one reason or another, and I think there's the reasoning is twofold. One, because he's gotten better, and two, because the offensive line has gotten better. But Jake it seemed that the game is slowed down for him, that he's not rushing things. He's, letting the play unfold. He's making all the reads. He's going through his progressions. I think maybe a little bit of pocket awareness and footwork are the two areas where you'd want to see more improvement as the season goes on. He pretty much stepped into 2 sacks. I think there was one where he kind of, instead of stepping up in the pocket, he stepped to his left and just like stepped right into the defender's arms, where it's like, if he steps up in that situation, I think, he doesn't take a sack there. And then, I think the Keelan miss throw was just purely footwork, but everything else, like the decision making was great. He didn't try to throw, into tight windows. There was multiple times where he would, the first read wasn't there, second read may not have been there, and he waits, and then Chase Roberts comes open over the middle, or Keelan Marion comes open, down the sideline. It was just like, I think that it was to Keanu Hill, kind of, I think it was like third quarter. It was an incomplete pass. He like kind of tried to fit it into a tight window, but there was another guy further down the sideline that was like double covered. I just, even though he tried to fit it into Keanu and ended up incomplete, I thought to myself, I'm like, man, like last year, Jake probably tries to go deep to that guy who's double covered and it ends up in an interception.
Yeah.
So to like not make that throw already, I think is progress from Jake. He wasn't as quick to run, I don't think, as he was a season ago, right? Like it was just the patience, the game speed, and making his reads that, to me, and decision making ultimately are the biggest areas of improvement that I saw. And I think that's just him putting in the work, working with John Beck over the offseason, but then the offensive line just being much improved, right? Giving him time to wait for the play to develop, giving him time for wide receivers to come open, giving him time to make more than 1 or 2 reads, I think is huge. I tweeted it out, Joe, you're the one who I think sent it in the group chat. Like, you just sent his PFF numbers, right? And his different splits. And you mentioned it in your article. I mentioned it in my tweet. 35 dropbacks. Of those 35, SIU brought pressure 16 times. And of those 35 dropbacks and 16 blitzes, he was only pressured 7 times, which is less than 50% of even just the blitzes, which is, I think, an incredible job by the line. And, as other people pointed out on Twitter, also the running backs, LJ and Hinckley did a phenomenal job of helping pick up blitzers. But all those things, I think, just lead to, it was a fantastic game by Jake, certainly his best game in a BYU uniform, I think, both statistically and just, eye test. So the question obviously remains, like, can he keep this up? Can he keep the momentum going as they go into the road, as they go up against tougher opponents? You've got a road P4 game this Friday night. Can he continue this momentum and continue to show that he's improved this offseason? Because that's the biggest thing, right? Like, Keaton Slovis looked pretty lights out against SUU a season ago, and then he would struggle against other opponents. So Jake's got to keep it going, certainly. Not ready to declare that like Jake is all-star superstar quarterback just yet, but like if he looks the way he looked on Saturday night as they go into conference play and against some tougher opponents, like he is certainly got the guy for this year and probably the guy for next year as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where watching him, you kind of touched on it a little bit, just even in the decision making, but just like the lack of turnover worthy plays. I think that's something that we've, especially when you look at like great quarterbacks that have come throughout BYU, not even just historically, but like recently, like Baylor didn't put the ball in danger. Zach didn't put the ball in danger. Jaron didn't put the ball in danger. And Jake did last season. And, there were passes that you were kind of wondering, like, what in the world were you thinking there? And there wasn't really any of those. We talked a little bit about that, the one to Keanu Hill, but that one was enough of a, he had a huge advantage over that corner, that I kind of live with that 50-50 ball. That's kind of something that, you just have to take from time to time. But one of the things, like the only pass that throughout the entire game, and it showed, you know, the kind of the shift in my mindset because of what he had done earlier in the game, was that ball that he missed Keelan on.
Behind him.
Yeah, so like last season, I might have been like, "Oh, Jake just can't make that throw." But over the course of this game, it was, Jake, if you had just set your feet there, you would have hit him. And so I think that's really what stood out too, is just even in that moment, it was like, oh man, Jake, like that was, you know, one of the few times you threw with not great mechanics, and I know you would have made that throw otherwise. And so it like, I feel like we watched him grow up a little bit in front of our eyes. Felt like he was aggressive, but it was more of calculated risks rather than just being reckless, which is what we saw a lot of last season.
100%. And that throw to Marion, that was like clearly that was a miss. Marion still got both hands on it. So it's not like it probably if I had to rank his worst throws of the night, one was the overthrow to Erickson. It happens. He got a little too excited. The second worst throw of the night was probably on the run, cross his body to Chase Roberts. Chase Roberts ended up falling down on the route trying to get back to it. And like, if that's the worst throw we made all night, like that was still in the vicinity. Like that is still a massive step forward from where we were a year ago. I don't know. Like I get this feeling like I at halftime, I tweeted that like when at this point, Jake had like 2 touchdowns and 188 yards passing. And I tweeted that like we owe Retzlaff an apology. And my mentions just got flooded with fans that were like, no, you owe us an apology for this take. Like he was awful. Like he played this, and this. And I'm like, to me, it kind of feels like, I don't know if you guys agree, like it still feels like there's a subset of the fan base that is like rooting against Jake a little bit. Like they almost want him to be bad. He finished with a 66% completion percentage. Adjusted for drops, it was a 73% completion percentage. And all we can do is fixate on a deep ball to a well-covered Keanu Hill that was a on-target pass that was just better coverage. Like I went through and charted all 10 incompletions that he threw, and it was a drop to a hitch route to Cody Epps that was dropped, another drop to Chase Roberts on a that was a different play, a deep ball that hit Parker Kingston right in the chest, 25 yards downfield opposite hash that was dropped. You had 2 throws that were on the run to Chase and Keelan that were misses, but again, forced out of the pocket under a lot of pressure, didn't have a chance to set his feet. You had a few plays to Keanu Hill that like Keanu Hill just seemed all out of sorts. Jake threw 10 incompletions all night long, and 4 of them were to Keanu Hill. He didn't seem to have it. There was obviously the miss to Ethan Erickson. And then like the one overthrow that he had to Cody Epps, which to me is more about timing. That happens when you get only half the reps in fall camp. Like there wasn't a single miss that I saw that was like, oh no, that's the same Jake. Like even his misses weren't catastrophic. And so like, I feel like he played well enough that I'm not ready to crown him the next great BYU quarterback, but I think he absolutely played well enough to get a fresh start. Like I wrote it in the article that like, let's just play the hypothetical game for a second, that all we knew about Jake Retzlaff, like let's just say Keaton Slovis never gets hurt. He plays the last 4 games of the season. Maybe BYU makes a bowl game. Keaton goes on, goes to the NFL. And then this entire offseason, we are hearing about Jake Retzlaff, how he was the number 1 junior college quarterback, how he has a full year in the system to learn the playbook, full offseason to train with John Beck. And then he comes out and puts up the exact same stat line, 66% completion percentage, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. What are we thinking about this quarterback if that's the first we've ever seen of him? Like, he played well enough, in my opinion, that it's time to put those 4 games that he was never supposed to play behind us. I get that's cherry picking, but at the same time, like we got to let the kid evolve, because it's very clear to me that in those 4 games, he didn't know what he was doing. he didn't know the playbook. He didn't have the reps. Like to your point, Trevor, he's making one read and he's bailing out of the pocket. He's forcing the ball downfield, just trying to make a play. Like all of that, just it feels like he was, trying to take a test that he didn't study for. And so he's just taking these like Hail Mary shots that ultimately don't work out. But now he just felt so much more like so poised in the pocket. And it like, yes, it was an FCS opponent, but again, there's a lot of teams that played FCS opponents and their quarterbacks didn't play as well as Jake did. On PFF, Jake, I think, had the third rated PFF grade in the Big 12, behind only Shadir Sanders and Noah Fafita for quarterbacks who threw at least 18 passes in their start. He balled. I think he was top 20 nationally in PFF. Like the kid was awesome, and definitely good enough in my mind to get a fresh start. His average depth of target in that game was 13.5, with an adjusted completion percentage, like I said, of 73%. Only 2 quarterbacks at BYU in the last 4 years have done that. Zach Wilson in 2020 against North Alabama, and Jaron Hall against Utah Tech in 2022. Like we haven't seen very many games like that from a BYU quarterback, regardless of what the competition is.
I think the biggest thing that got me the most excited for the rest of the season was looking back at this film and watching Jake. It just dawned on me that if we took this Jake and we dropped him into the Oklahoma State game, I think we win both of those games pretty easily, actually. And we're not, like Joe said, like the thing, let's just address the elephant in the room. The thing that's sticking with BYU fans and maybe why there's kind of this deep-seated angst, something that, I think I've dealt with at times too, if I'm being honest. I mean, I don't want to sit here and say, oh, we knew that this was coming and that, Jake never had a fair shake last season. We had a whole offseason to discuss our concerns. But that pick 6 has resonated like loudly for months. And I think that's something that people have to like forgive. Is this like, I don't know, is this about to turn into gospel doctrine? I just like, it's just like one of those things where like eventually we do, like myself included, just kind of have to let that go. And Jake played like he let that go. And that to me is what's been a big difference.
And I love what they said on the broadcast when A-Rod, like after that Oklahoma game, like coming into the offseason, A-Rod straight up asked him, like, are these mistakes, like, can you get rid of these mistakes, or is that just who you are? Like, I love that question from A-Rod, because I think that's the question that all of us were asking. And I think Jake answered the bell. I really do. By all accounts, again, if the broadcast is to be believed, I don't know if I believe it, but he had 1 turnover, like 1 interception between fall camp and spring ball. Like, I don't know if that's true, but based off the performance we got, it could be like, because again, he was smart with the football, and we got the upside of Jake that we wanted with none of the downside. Again, not ready to crown him the next great BYU quarterback. We'll see how he looks against SMU. But man, this was a really strong start to the 24 season, and it's enough again for me to just kind of throw out the tape from last season and just say, okay, this is a brand new quarterback that we're evaluating, and the one data point we have of the new Jake Retzlaff is awesome.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, kudos also to receivers. I think, Hinckley stepped up with LJ being a little banged up. LJ was still great receiving and rushing touchdown. Trevor, you were kind of going back and forth with Stats Man on Twitter, but like first BYU running back to do that in a few years, to have a rushing and a receiving touchdown in the same game.
Yeah, it was like Algier never did it. And like to this day, that sounds like BYU Crazy. Stats Man is fantastic. And I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but like I want him to know he does phenomenal work. Like I want to go on record to say he does phenomenal work. I'm still waiting for him to just be like, gotcha. You know what I mean? Like there's no way Algier never pulled that off. And yet he didn't. He actually only had 1 receiving touchdown. It was against UMass in like 2019. And so the fact that, like to your point, Hunter, the fact that LJ was able to get involved, like the receivers, like everyone just like they did their job.
So the receivers were awesome. Like awesome. There was an open receiver on pretty much every play. Even the incompletions that were, just misses, like Chase was open on the run throw. Keelan Marion was open. JoJo Phillips, just like a 6'4" guy who can straight up just run past you. Like that is terrifying for opposing defenses that BYU has one of those. And he's probably not one of BYU's top 5 or top 4 receivers.
This is all without Darius.
Yeah, like all without Darius, like
top 2 receiver.
But like again, the receivers were so good. And comparing it to the tight ends, like we talk about wanting 14. Some BYU fans are talking about how we want the tight ends to get 10 targets a game. Jake was like 2 for 7 targeting tight ends in this game, but 18 for 23 targeting receivers. Receiver, like we just got a really good receiving core, guys.
Am I crazy? Am I crazy to say though that the receivers were good, but like not what they could have been? Like
that's the scariest part is BYU didn't play a perfect game. There were still multiple drops that could have gone for huge plays. Jake Retzlaff missed some throws that could have been touched. Like there is still a lot to improve, and the offense looked so much better than it did last year. That's like exhilarating.
Had a missed field goal.
Yeah,
like left 3 points on the board.
Like BYU
and a fumble that was somehow an incompletion. I mean, like they took at least 4, because we got a field goal out of that one, so they took 4 points off the board for that. That would have been an easy touchdown.
I think it was.
They ended up scoring a touchdown on that anyway.
Because I think he shanked the punt.
Sorry, he did shank the punt. So they ended up.
You're right.
It was
like
37 yards, whatever.
Never mind.
But like, I know I'm talking a lot, and I apologize. I just have a lot of great stats.
It's your podcast.
So it is our podcast. One of my favorite stats is available yards. Essentially, like what it means is if you start the drive on the 25-yard line, you have 75 available yards. And if you go all 75, you get 100%. So BYU last year against SUU, the offense gained 54.9% of the available yards that they had before them. That's bad against an FCS opponent. In this game, BYU gained 72.3% of the available yards. For reference, in 2020, BYU's offense was number 1 in the country, and they averaged about 71% of the available yards. So like this was an incredible performance from the BYU offense. And there really weren't any wasted drives. Like drive number 1, touchdown. Drive number 2, touchdown. Drive number 3, you get it down to the 18-yard line and you miss a field goal. And obviously missed a wide open receiver for a touchdown. Drive number 4, turnover on downs, but you still went 60 yards on that drive. Drive number 5, you get a field goal, then it's touchdown. And then you have your first punt of the night, like late in the third quarter. There really wasn't a wasted or bad drive that BYU had. And it's because everyone stepped up. Like, I mean, shout out to the offensive line against SUU last year. BYU running backs averaged -1 yard before contact, meaning that they were getting met in the backfield on average almost every single play. In this game, BYU's offensive line allowed 2.1 yards before contact. So that's a 3-yard difference, 3-yard improvement against a much better FCS level opponent. Like there's, again, just a lot to be excited about with the consistency of this BYU offense. And like, we haven't even gotten the explosive plays on the ground yet, which I think we assume we'll get at some point.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about on the offense, but I feel like the defense needs some roses, just like
100%.
The linebacking core, like the one real shame is that we do not get to see Ben Bywater in this linebacking core. Like Glasker's like tackle for a loss was like some WWE type, like just
it's the kind of thing that would like make you yell at the screen if it happened to you in NCAA 25.
Like his play recognition on that screen was unreal.
Arm, yes. Like the strength to be able to make that tackle, like to read the play, like he's healthy, he's making plays. Just like this linebacking core is really good, and we were told, we won't give away our source, but there was a player on the football team that told us that Jack Kelly was legit, and I think he undersold him still somehow.
Not even a player.
Jack Kelly is
he had a quiet night, but man, that quiet night was amazing. Like he was in the backfield almost every single play. To your point, Trevor, the linebacker play recognition was incredible. Like shout out to Kalani Sitake and Jay Hill, and for calling the Blasker. Sorry, the fact that did you lose me?
Yeah,
you're back though.
You said the fact that Kalani and Jay Hill, and then you froze.
Just called such a great game. There was a jet sweep that, again, last year, like who knows what would have happened. Che Bryant Struther just saw it, went straight to the backfield and waited with his arms open as the receiver just ran into his waiting arms.
He was like the mom of a return missionary that just got off the plane. Like that's what that looked like. Like he just ran right into his arms, just waiting.
The linebackers were great. The defensive line I thought looked great. Allowed 2 net yards rushing to everyone. Not that's not a quarterback. We can talk about if we're worried about the quarterback run game or not. But like the defensive line was getting pressure all night long. Ephraim Asiata is like 200 pounds soaking wet and was still in the backfield almost constantly. Isaiah Banya had a sack. Logan Latui probably should have had a sack. Jack Kelly barely missed on a sack. John Nelson and Blake
but then turned around and made a play.
Pressures. Yeah, like both Blake Mangelson and John Nelson had great games from the defensive tackle spot. Like again, I get it, FCS opponent, but again, if we want to talk available yards, BYU allowed 40% of available yards to SUU last year. In this game, it was 26%, and that was with a 40-yard pass and a touchdown that never should have been. If you take out that, it's like 18% of available yards. So like this defense was nails all night long. And really it was just like every time the defense came out onto the field, I'm just like, great, 4 plays and we can get back to the offense.
I think I'm trying to do quick math here. They held them to 5 3-and-outs. 4 3-and-out, 5.
So
I think
5 3-and-outs, and I think it was 9 plays of non-scoring with an average of 3.8 yards per drive. 3.8 plays per drive.
5 3-and-outs, an interception. Should have been a fumble. Like the defense was all over the guys were flying around, for lack of a better term, right?
So who played better, offense or defense?
That's a great question. Again, because for the defense, you are a fluke, failed, incorrect 50-yard completion away from only allowing 7 points.
And like 40 yards passing.
And 40 yards passing and, 2 turnovers, 5 3-and-outs.
And that offensive line is pretty good. Like that's a G5 level offensive line.
They returned every single one of their linemen from
they had 8 players on that offensive line that have played at least 10 games in college. They have a receiver who's a transfer from Wisconsin, received an 87 transfer rating. He was the one that he was the one who caught that or didn't catch that deep bomb down the field. He's a legitimate Power 5 receiver. He is very, very good. And Evan Johnson went with him stride for stride. Like shout out to the corners, shout out to the safeties, shout out to the entire freaking team, shout out to the Water Boys. Really proud of that effort. And again, hope you can sustain it. Because again, if this is sustainable, we're don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but next year's looking pretty good with all of these returning guys.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't be returning on the defense? Tyler,
it's like Jack Kelly has eligibility left. Glasker has eligibility left. You lose Batty, you lose Banya, but you replace them with Asiata and Fonohema, along with a couple of other defensive ends that are not in the program just yet. Linebackers are all back. Corners are pretty much all back except Mark Collins and Jacob Robinson. Like,
I mean, that's the other thing. Like Titan corners, like you played without Maury Bamba, who was like a projected.
He was going to start
starter opposite of Jacob. So you held them to 108 passing yards. Again, should have been like 58 passing yards without one of your projected starting cornerbacks.
I was like
Trey was out there for a good ball, and granted it was on the drive where they let up a touchdown, but like he was out there.
I will go to my grave. He got held. He would have made that tackle otherwise. He got held. But
absolutely,
I was really proud of Mark Collins too. Like I felt like on a day where Jacob Robinson got thrown to one time, and we know how that ended. Like Mark Collins had a pretty busy night, and he looked good. There wasn't a single time where I felt like he was out of position. You brought up Evan Johnson. Like he should have had a PBU there. It would have been like the correct, statistic there. But unfortunately, the, referees refuse to hear timeouts. From what I understand, Kalani's a pretty loud guy if you actually pay attention. But
I need him like 20 yards out onto the field though in that situation. Like you cannot take no for an answer.
That's fair. And I think that's, that definitely can fall on him there. But for him to come in, it just seems like these plug and play Weber guys, like no wonder Weber was good. You know what I mean? Like Jay Hill has just done something to that defense to make these guys just legit. And then they come to the D1 level and it works. The guys, even I know they were talking to him post game. Some of the guys that have been here at BYU that, were in Jay Hill's defense last year, like they all are a lot more assignment sound now. And it shows. And so shout out to Jack Kelly and Mark Collins for coming in and just kind of doing their thing, regardless of, what level of football it's being played at. And like the rest of the guys for just kind of seeing Jay Hill's vision, regardless of whether he was up in the booth or if he was still at the hospital or whatever. It gets me really excited for the games where he does get to just coach. Like this was like defense, like by a committee. It was Kalani Sitake, like shout out Gavin Fowler. He was like coaching the safeties. Like Jay Hill, based off of reports, is going to be back. And I think this defense is going to be even more fired up than we even saw on Saturday.
Jonathan Cabea on the Coug Connect player AMA on the Coug Connect Discord said there was no difference from, Jay Hill calling the defense during practices and through fall camp to Kalani calling it during the game.
Dude, Kalani called such a great game.
Never mind then. I stand corrected.
Well, that wasn't just, correct you. It was just the fact that, like, I think the coaches and Jay Hill, I mean, you spoke to Jay Hill and just, how good he is as a coach. I think this speaks to that, where it's like he coached them so well during fall camp and spring ball and leading up to this game. And the game plan was so cemented in place that like they could have had a different, coach altogether, which they did, calling the defense, and there was no adjustment needed on their part, right? Like they knew what to do. They went in so prepared. Tom Brady, and not to draw everything back to the New England Patriots, and I'll be quick on it because we've gone an hour and we haven't even started to preview the SMU game. But like Brady and Gronk and Edelman and, a lot of Patriots have talked about this, where it's like they went into every game knowing exactly what they needed to do to win, because Belichick and the Patriots coaches had done such a good job of preparing them throughout the week in lead up to each game, where they knew going into that week, if we do this, they're going to do this, and we respond with this, and we'll win the game, right? Like they just knew exactly what to do. The game plan was so cemented and firm in their heads, and they had practiced it, to perfection, where they could walk into any situation and know what to do in order to win the game. That's kind of how I felt, reading what Jonathan Cabea had to say, where it's Jay Hill had prepared them this game so well that he could have been in the booth, not calling the defense. They still knew exactly what they needed to do to win the game. And that's not to discredit Kalani, because like you said, Joe, I think Kalani called a great, but the players so well matter that it was someone totally different on Saturday.
And again, it was both sides of the ball. Like, it wasn't just the defense looking really well prepared. Shout out to A-Rod. He called an excellent game too. And there were very few times where I felt like anyone was out of position. There wasn't like, there was the one with Keanu Hill that was kind of weird. That was another one of the incompletions where Keanu Hill thought he should be blocking when he was the intended receiver. Like, that was really the only miscue on the night, I thought, from a mental perspective.
There was Parker Kingston running into Keanu Hill's back on the wide receiver.
And we gotta teach our receivers to read blocks better, man. Like, if we're gonna use them.
Jake too, I think, could have had a rushing touchdown if he would have bounced outside, followed his block, but he tried to cut inside and got tackled. But yeah,
Chase Roberts as well. No, it's just like it. I get it. It's one game. It's an FCS opponent. Like, is this going to translate to 10 wins this season? No, but again, we can celebrate that for the first time in 2 years, BYU looked like a capable, competent, and complete football team. It's the first time in 2 years I watched 60 minutes of BYU football and enjoyed every minute of it. Like, it has been a long time. Like, when was the last time you watched a game that was like a stress-free win?
I mean, aside from like SUU last year was a stress-free win.
Even SUU, like, you still left that game with kind of like a sour taste in your mouth because it's like, okay, the defense couldn't make stops and we couldn't run the ball.
Yeah, well, that was different. But like, there was no part of that game where you were like, oh man, they're not going to win.
Like, you never thought the other team was going to win, but it's like, even Utah Tech in 2022, like, Utah Tech had the lead at the end of the first quarter. Like, it's been a long time. Like, maybe honestly, it was probably USF 2022 was the last time I felt.
Yeah, week one of exactly like, 2 years ago today.
Like, the game was put away before the first quarter was over, and it was clear that BYU was the better team. Like, it was
put away right after Puka went 80 yards or whatever for a touchdown.
Yeah, it's just been a long time since I've watched a game and felt that way. Let's look ahead. BYU has a really tough contest this week with SMU. SMU currently is just out. Like, they're receiving votes in the top 25. I believe FPI has them in the top. I think all the major computer rankings have SMU in the top 30. They didn't look that way against Nevada. Is that a fair assessment?
Did not look that way against Nevada. Did indeed look that way against Houston Christian. Although
Houston Christian for reference would be a 32-point dog to Southern Illinois, but I digress.
Yeah, it's essentially BYU played Notre Dame of FCS.
Like legitimately,
and SMU played Colorado State.
So SIU is currently ranked the 92nd ranked team in the country, according to SP Plus. That is better than, like, I think the comp there is Utah State. I think Utah State is 93, which is just brutal. But like, that's the caliber of team. Like, BYU basically beat kind of a mid to low level G5 team by 30.
Yeah, SIU to Houston Christian is Notre Dame, Utah State.
Yeah,
in terms of comparisons at that level.
It may even be worse.
Passing yards, they actually performed better passing the ball against Nevada, oddly enough. But 470 rushing yards against Houston Christian on 54 attempts.
So did you watch
7 yards per carry?
So I watched every snap of the Nevada game. SMU could not run the ball against Nevada. I think they ended the game with
100 yards.
And something like under 3 yards per carry. And I'm pretty sure this week against Troy, Nevada gave up like 5 yards per carry to Troy. So like, going back and watching some of that Houston Christian game, SMU just outmatched Houston Christian on every level. Like, those lanes that the running backs had to run through were like Mack truck levels of open, and they broke like 4 or 5 runs for over 40 yards. Like, SMU just like completely dismantled that Houston Christian defensive line. But it was the kind of manhandling where it's just like, okay, this was too easy. I don't know how much I can like actually read into how good you are.
Yeah, no, to your point.
Go ahead, Trevor.
2.9 yards per carry against Nevada. You said below 3, and it was just wanted to confirm that for you. But go ahead, Hunter.
I think it's one of those situations where it's like you can't read into either game, right? Like one is a week 0 road game in Reno that was for some reason snowing in August. And the other was Houston Christian. So it's like, how much can you really read into either game? It's almost as if you talk about Jake Retzlaff being a blank slate. I'm almost thinking this SMU game is a blank slate for our predictions as far as they go. Like, because I can look at it and be like, well, they can't run the ball. They only had 100 yards on 34 attempts against Nevada, but they also ran for almost 400 yards on 7 yards per carry against Houston Christian. One's FCS, but one was week 0. Like, it's just, there's underlying reasons and asterisks against nearly everything I think you could point to with this SMU team. And we just don't know who they are yet. Like BYU could go in, like the rushing defense for BYU is so great, particularly when it comes to running backs, and that's how SMU is going to attack. It's not like Preston Stone is this dual threat. Like, he can tuck and run if he needs to, but he's never going to be a run first dual threat quarterback. And that's really what hurt this BYU run defense. Like you pointed out, 2 yards total rushing by the running backs by SIU. So using that logic, then I would say BYU is going to be able to stop the run. And then all you have to do is, let Preston Stone pass the ball, and hopefully he looks more like how he looked against Nevada, where he just looked dreadful for 3.5 quarters.
I mean, his QBR against Houston Christian was 58.8. Like that's the most bizarre thing about SMU right now is like, I don't even think SMU knows who they are, because Preston Stone coming into the season was considered one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC, and we're still in a QB battle. I think they named Preston Stone the starter officially today, but they also ended that press conference by saying we're still going to see Kevin Jennings, during the game. So it's like, he said, and I quote, "If I was BYU, I would prepare for both," which is really like, that is BYU levels of misinformation, because in the press conference where you're literally saying, "Hey, this is our guy, by the way, you should still prepare for both." Like, how stupid do you think we are?
If they need to prepare for anyone on this SMU team, it's RJ Maryland, the tight end.
Dude, that dude's a dog.
So
he single-handedly won them the game against Nevada. If he was never born, SMU would be 1-1 with a road loss to Nevada in Reno.
Yeah, he had like 164 receiving yards.
Jacob Robinson, come on down.
But I don't think did anything against Houston Christian.
But the one thing I'm like honestly most interested in is like, how does a guy like Isaiah Glasker? Sorry, am I lost again?
You're good.
One thing that like I'm most interested to see is like, how does a guy like Isaiah Glasker match up with RJ Maryland? Because Isaiah Glasker is a former safety. He's 6'5", 245, but still kind of runs like a safety. Like I feel like that matchup in the slot could be something. Other than that, like I don't feel confident with really any of our guys in the secondary covering RJ Maryland one-on-one. But if you can, I also don't feel confident in like any of the other SMU receivers.
Yeah, it's I sat down and I watched not like the entirety of both games, but I did watch like the receivers are athletic, although it's just one of those things where, like Hunter was talking about it before, like the Houston Christian game is tough because Houston Christian's tackling was like abhorrent. Like it was awful. And
I mean, they're an awful football team.
Yeah. So like it was the team, to be honest, up to this point is kind of giving me like BYU transitioning from 2021 to 2022. Like, you have this incredible season in 2021. They win the AAC. They get invited to go play in the ACC. They have, in theory, all these dogs to bring in and immediately compete. And they're good, but they're not like as good as everyone thought they would be. Like BYU, like 8-5 is a respectable season, but it's not what BYU fans were expecting out of that team. Bringing back Jaron Hall, bringing back Puka, bringing back, Max Tooley and all these guys. The thing to me that really stands out for this team and the matchup that I personally am going to be watching is going to be this offensive line of SMU's against our front seven. Because Preston Stone, probably like any other quarterback in the country, is elite when he has like 4 or 5 seconds to throw the ball. There were times against Nevada and there were times against Houston Christian where he was running for his life. And I'm just not sure that offensive line is as good as it needs to be to make sure that SMU engine on offense runs the way that it should. And if our guys are, it wasn't just because it was the Salukis and they're actually good, if they can get pressure on Preston Stone, I think he forces balls as is. So if he feels pressure, he's going to make mistakes. Like, we've got guys out there that can capitalize on that. And so for me, that was the ultimate kind of synopsis that I got from this, is if our front seven can do, what they did against SIU, I think this SMU team is going to be pretty vulnerable on offense.
Their offensive line looks really good. At least so far in the season, haven't really given up a ton of pressure. Again, the running game has looked really solid. Ironically, SMU got the same run, according to PFF, SMU got the same run grade against Nevada as they did against Houston Christian, even with the 800 yards rushing. But like
for PFF, you're like, what?
But like the SMU rushing attack is so weird because, like, yes, they had one guy go for 9 carries, 108 yards, but Derek McFall, who's their number one running back, carried the ball 16 times for 69 yards and 4.3 yards per carry. So it's like, even against Houston Christian, you ran up a bajillion yards on them, but when it was your number one guy, your bell cow that you want to run the ball effectively, and Houston Christian knew like that's who's getting the ball, they were still able to hold you to 4.3 yards per carry. So like, again, we're the hype train podcast.
Rashard Smith has 21 attempts for 180 yards.
I get it. I get it. On defense, SMU, their pass rush is incredible. I really like SMU's defensive line. This is going to be a completely different test than what BYU faced last week. Good news, Caleb Etienne apparently looks like an awesome left tackle. Received the highest PFF grade on the team. I think he was like in the high 80s or something like that on both pass blocking and run blocking. If BYU's offensive line can contain this defensive line, I think Jake Retzlaff, like BYU's receivers, can pick off this cornerback room one by one. Like I really like the matchups that we have with their corners.
Hot takes and predictions.
I think BYU is gonna win.
Didn't see that coming.
I don't know. Again, it's a bizarro game, but like I just have this strange feeling that this is a completely different BYU team. Like right now, BYU is an 10.5 point underdog. According to SP Plus, BYU is a 11 point underdog to SMU at SMU. But BYU right now also has the 75th ranked defense, according to SP Plus, which I think is grossly undervaluing what a year 2 of the Jay Hill defense will look like. I think BYU is undervalued. I think it's going to be a much closer game. I think it's going to be somewhere in the realm of like 28-24, maybe. Again, I like SMU's offense a lot. But this BYU's defense is going to be a little bit different of an animal than they've played so far this year. And again, like I just can't get that Nevada game out of my head. Like they just looked all out of sorts against Nevada. I get it, on the road in a weird place, but I think I still like BYU in this one, especially based off of what I saw on Saturday.
I'm going to say 38-31 for BYU. I think, and I do think that ironically, even though they gave up 31 points, I think the defense looks good in this. So my hot take is the defense forces
it's the Arkansas game last year, right?
Yes, forces 2 turnovers.
Yeah, I'll amend mine to say 31-28. I think SMU's offense is still going to put up some points, but
31-28. See, I see it lower scoring. I think it's clearly the first challenge that BYU will face, and I think it's the toughest team SMU will have faced this season as well. And I don't think it's even a lukewarm take to say either of those things. So I think it's going to be more of a adjustment learning curve. I think they did some BYU offense obviously showed some nice things. We spent 40 minutes talking about it, and Jake Retzlaff's improvements and the line's improvements. But again, this is a much, much better defense than SIU and a better defensive line. I think there's going to be more pressures. He's not going to have quite as much time. So for that reason, I don't think that they're going to score in the 40s. I don't even think they're going to score in the 30s. I still have a BYU win, of course. I'm just going to say 27-24. I think you get a couple of field goals. And it's going to be a late defensive stop like we saw in the New Mexico Bowl in 2022. Last time BYU faced SMU, where they stopped them on that 2-point conversion. So I think another late stop by the BYU defense is going to give them the victory this week.
Man, you got me going back and forth, dude. Like Trevor had me thinking the offense is going to look great, and now I'm thinking I should go back to my 28-24 pick.
I mean, Trevor has them scoring almost as much as they did against SIU.
But they also scored 38 against Arkansas. So if you're going to get 2 turnovers, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Hot takes. Give me BYU 450 yards of offense again.
Another one.
The hot take is they're going to repeat it.
I mean, it's good for me. I don't have to change the graphic. Trevor, you gave yours to defensive takeaways. I'm going to say he makes his triumphant return, and Darius Lassiter has 2 receiving touchdowns.
We don't even have Darius yet.
And I'm going to go out and I'm going to say that the third one, because I have BYU scoring 3 touchdowns, the third one is going to be the hometown kid, Keanu Hill.
Nice.
Back in Dallas, where his uncle made a name for himself. So
love it. Fun times, man. Best time of the year. BYU's 1-0. Vibes are good. We'll see how we're feeling on Friday, but we're only by the time you guys are listening to this, we're only about 2 days away from game day.
A Friday game this early in the season has my brain in a blender. I can't fathom that Friday. I mean, having to watch a BYU game on Friday night. Friday night games should be reserved for conference weekend only.
That's a hot take.
What are we doing? Playing a Friday night game?
Do we have 2?
September?
Okay, look.
Do we have 2 Friday games?
But tell me if BYU, if BYU wins on Saturday, wins on Friday.
Even you thought it was Saturday. I rest my case.
But tell me that morning after turning on College Game Day, maybe BYU is going to be talked about as one of the surprise teams so far in college football. And then you get to watch
anything other than SEC on that show.
Fair point. Then you get to watch, 12 hours of stress-free football because BYU's already gotten the job done, and I get to watch Baylor just run up the score on Utah.
Or you're just gonna be. Well, I'm not even gonna put that into existence. It worked out well for me because I actually had my high school reunion on Saturday evening. So,
oh, nice.
Bunch of nonsense to have it during the football season. We had all summer to have a reunion. You think I graduated in September? Not a chance. I'm gonna go by for like 30 minutes and then go back to my friend's house and watch college football. So I guess in hindsight, fine Friday night, because it means I don't have to miss my reunion or miss the game. But still, again, I like September Friday night games. Let the high school kids have a moment for at least a little bit. But Friday, Thursday, Wednesday afternoon, don't matter. Cougs by a billion.
Go Cougs.